Bonjour, la classe. I hope you enjoyed chapter 18, was it, of the Lavellan? And this is the final chapter of the book. Now, I have to say, I'm absolutely thrilled that it's the final chapter of the book because this has become such a tiring and exhausting job to do. So I'm afraid from now on we won't be doing comprehension like this. We'll be doing written comprehension because I'm absolutely exhausted with writing with writing to such a tricky deadline. I will see if I can find a class novel online. There's lots of authors now who are doing free books, so I will just pick one of them. So the final chapter of the Lavellan then. Okay, so if you remember, we just had the climax. We just had the big fight between them and Eric had died of terror because Darwin had barked 3 times, and he's a cushy, which means if he barks 3 times and you've not found safety by the 3rd bark, you die from terror. It's a Highland myth, I think. Okay, so I was in a daze on the journey back to the cottage. I'm not really sure what happened, how long it took, what the conversation was about. All I could think were my mixed emotions. My thrilled relief at getting Darwin back safe and sound, mixed with the guilt and horror at seeing Eric's face after he had died. It wasn't that he was dead that bothered me, but the look of complete terror that I had witnessed. I found myself hoping that the 2 henchmen had reached safety before they heard the final bark. When we had got back to the cottage, we all sat inside the kitchen with Darwin leaning against me, so I had to lean against the table for support. The Lavellan was out of its cage and had found a suitable nesting place to the right of the window, in amongst the thick curtain. We all sat there for a while, humans and most of the animals, all stunned into silence, sipping our tea in a zombie-like manner. Questions were beginning to form in my head, but it was like I could only see them through the fog in my brain. I looked at Chris. He had vanished and then reappeared again after Darwin's final bark. At the same time that he came back, one of the animals had vanished. I realised that the strange fox-like creature had gone, and I hadn't seen it since Chris appeared. I have some questions, I whispered, not daring to shatter the quiet atmosphere with my normal voice. I didn't say any more, but waited for Mum to acknowledge my sentence. She looked at me, her eyes hooded over with tiredness, but nodded. I think you've earned some answers, she replied, looking across at her colleagues as if she expected them to disagree, but they remained silent. For another minute, the only noise was Iliad's snoring. I stayed silent too, and waited. Eventually, it was Carol who spoke. Tell us one of your questions, then, she grinned, the effort looking like it might exhaust her. What question to choose? What happened to you? I directed the question at Chris, who was sitting up in his chair, looking the most alert out of everybody who was there. He looked across at me, his eyes unnerving me slightly. I stared back at him, determined to show that I was slightly concerned. Determined not to show that I was slightly concerned. You did a really brave thing earlier, he said. I didn't feel like it was supposed to be a compliment, just a statement, really. I mean, it could have killed everyone there, but I don't see what else we could have done. Thank you, I muttered, wondering where Chris was going with this. Chris is a good member of our team, Mum explained, possibly seeing that Chris was just going to confuse things further. He understands mythical animals so well because he is one. I sat still for a moment while everything began to click into place. "The fox," I mumbled. "Yes," Mum nodded. "Well, I won't try saying Chris's real name because it's in Chinese and I can never pronounce it, but translated it means the nine-tailed fox. He can change his shape from that to any other larger animal. To us, he's a human. To the mythical creatures, he's a fox." I looked at Chris, but realised I was being rude by staring and turned away, sneaking only small glances every now and then. He certainly looked like a fox, with his pointed features and alert gaze, and I had made up my mind that I could believe anything about these animals was possible. "So, how did you all meet?" I asked my other question that had been niggling at me. "Is there like a university for cryptozoology or something?" Mum grinned and then turned to her friends. Her reluctance to answer only sharpened my curiosity, but fortunately George spoke up. "We work in the same department," he replied. "That's how we know each other." Carol took over then. "We work to protect and catalogue different mythical animals," she said. "It's part of the government that deals with it." "So you work for the government?" I asked, unsure what I thought about this. Dad had always criticised the government, no matter who was in charge. "Yes," Mum said. "Now, we shouldn't really be telling you all of this." "She's proven she has a right to know," Carol interrupted, facing a glare from Mum, but ignored it and turned back to me. "It's better you know what we do, and you know you can't tell anybody, than you go and try and work out what we do with all your friends." "I won't tell anyone," I smiled, feeling like I was part of something exciting and wonderful just by sharing the secret. But then the realization struck me that this secret keeping might not be the best. What about Dad? I should be honest with him. "Dad knows," Mum explained, "so that's fine. Just don't go shouting about it when you get back to school." I nodded, knowing that the only people I'd want to talk about it were Mum and Dad. No one else would understand. They'd all think I was going mad, which I'd have probably thought a couple of weeks ago. Mum came to say good night when I'd got ready for bed. Darwin had braved the stairs and was allowed to curl up at the bottom of my bed tonight. The Lavellan had sleepily climbed the stairs too and curled up on the spare blanket. I lay on the bed, looking up at the sloping ceiling until Mum put her head around the door. "Darling," she whispered, "are you awake?" I sat up slightly and she came into the room. "I'm not sure I said thank you," she said softly, sitting down on the bed. "Mum," I whispered, "I keep seeing Eric's face. Was he dead?" "Yes," Mum replied with such honesty it felt like I'd been pushed backwards. I shivered and Mum just pulled me closer to her. "It wasn't you," she said. "You did the only thing you could think of and it worked, but it wasn't you who killed him." I looked at Darwin and for a moment saw a killer instead of the loyal dog. "No, it wasn't Darwin either," Mum explained, following my gaze. "The oldest information I can find about the Kushi is that it is the person's inner feelings that the Kushi opens up. Eric's inner feelings were not good. All he wanted was more trophies for his animal collection. With Darwin's third bark, Eric's own nastiness and cruelty turned on him. Well, it made your care and love for Darwin 10 times stronger." My tired, dizzy head couldn't make any sense of it, but I would think about it more in the morning. Mum stayed while I drifted off to sleep, and the last thought I remembered having was that feeling the need to ring and talk to my dad the following morning. The next day I did exactly that. We must have talked for nearly an hour in the early morning, not about much. I mentioned that I'd found out what Mum's job was, but I didn't want to worry him while I was away. I could tell him the full story when I saw him again. As for the Lavellan, I knew I had to take him back to the river. He didn't belong inside, and while he behaved like it was an adventure, I wanted to make sure that he could get back to his family, just like I wanted Dad to be here. I wouldn't use the cage, but carried the Lavellan down to the river with Darwin plodding beside me. When the three of us got there, I gently placed the creature on the ground. For a moment, it just sniffed the air and then scuttled off to the long grasses. Just before it vanished into its home, it turned around and looked at me through its sky blue eyes. Then it swung around and rustled into the grass. I grinned and wondered if I would see it again anytime soon. And that is not only the end of the chapter, but the end of the book. Thank goodness. Okay, comprehension time. 3 questions. First question, Rex Retriever. What was Chris? What was he? So as well, he wasn't a human. He could become a human, but what actually was he? I am looking for the correct English term for it, so you don't need to say the Chinese term because it wasn't in the story. Question number 2. Do you think that the main character will see the Lavellan again? Do you think the main character would see the Lavellan again? And because it's a yes/no question, you've got to say why you think that. And the last question, why couldn't the main character tell their friends about Mum's job? Why couldn't they tell their friends about Mum's job? So that is it for today. We will try and do some written comprehension, I think, next week. Don't worry about it for the rest of this week. We'll start again next week. Now, if you like, as an extra challenge, you can see if you can find out the real Chinese name for the animal that Chris is. I will give a dojo to anybody who can tell me the correct Chinese name, and you can write it in the English alphabet, that's fine, but anyone who can tell me how it's written, and the deadline will say is Wednesday night. So try and get it up by Wednesday night and you get a dojo. Okay, now thank you very much for reading or listening to the whole book. I'm so pleased we got to the end of it, and I will see you later. Bye bye for now.